For 15 years, she cleaned the same hospital corridors. Never spoke much about her past, never complained, just did her job and quietly went home. Doctors knew her as the quiet cleaning lady. Nurses greeted her politely, but no one wondered who she really was. Until the day she saved the chief surgeon's life during a heart attack in the operating room. Welcome to Silent Hero Stories. Before we tell this powerful story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe and help these voices be heard. The hospital would wake from silence every morning at 5:30 a.m., but Sarah Martinez was already there. She'd prepare her cleaning cart, put everything in its place, and begin her daily route. Same corridors, same rooms, same routine. It hadn't changed in the 8 years she'd been working there. Sarah was 38 years old, with dark hair usually pulled back and a practical ponytail, and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to notice everything. She had an understated beauty that she deliberately downplayed. No makeup, simple clothes, nothing that would draw attention. She walked with confident steps despite pushing a cleaning cart, and there was something about her posture that suggested she'd once carried herself very differently. The staff knew her as a reliable, quiet worker. "Good morning, Sarah," they'd say, and she'd respond with a warm but brief smile. She didn't socialize much, never joined the other cleaning staff for lunch, and always seemed to have somewhere else to be. Her personnel file was surprisingly thin. Hired in 2016, excellent references, perfect attendance record, but very little personal information. Sarah's work schedule was methodical and efficient. First, she'd clean the emergency department, then the operating theaters, followed by the intensive care units. She knew every inch of the hospital, understood the flow of staff and patients, and seemed to anticipate where she'd be needed before anyone asked. Her cleaning technique was thorough but fast, and she had an uncanny ability to work around medical emergencies without getting in the way. But there were things about Sarah that no one had quite put together. She never flinched during trauma cases. When ambulances screamed into the emergency bay, while other staff tensed up, Sarah remained completely calm. When she cleaned up after surgeries or accidents, her hands never shook, no matter how much blood was involved. It was as if she'd seen worse things before. Dr. Rachel Chen, a 32-year-old emergency medicine physician, had worked alongside Sarah for 3 years. She'd always respected the quiet efficiency of the cleaning staff, but there was something different about Sarah. She moved through medical crises with an awareness that seemed almost tactical, positioning herself to help without being asked, anticipating needs before they arose. "She's not like the other housekeeping staff," Dr. Chen had mentioned once to Nurse Lisa Rodriguez. "Have you noticed how she handles trauma scenes? Most people get queasy, but she's completely professional." "I thought the same thing," Lisa had replied. "And have you seen her hands? They're steady as a surgeon's. I've watched her help lift patients, and she knows exactly where to grip to avoid injury. That's not something you learn from cleaning floors." Security guard James Wilson, a former Marine, had also picked up on subtleties about Sarah that others missed. She had situational awareness that went beyond normal caution. She always knew who was behind her, never turned her back to room entrances unnecessarily, and had a way of scanning her environment that reminded him of his own military training. Her eyes would track movement in a way that suggested she was constantly assessing potential threats. During her breaks, Sarah would sit alone in the small employee lounge, usually reading medical journals that she'd found discarded in doctors' offices. When asked about it once, she'd simply said she found medicine interesting. But the way she read wasn't casual browsing. She studied those articles with the intensity of someone who understood exactly what she was reading. Dr. Marcus Webb, a veteran emergency physician nearing retirement, had noticed Sarah during several critical cases. She had an instinct for medical emergencies that couldn't be taught. When code blues were called, she'd already be moving equipment out of the way, or preparing spaces for incoming teams. During a particularly chaotic night when a multi-car accident brought in 7 patients, Sarah had organized triage areas and supply stations with military precision. "That woman has medical training," Dr. Webb had told his colleague, Dr. Stevens. "I've been doing this for 30 years, and I can spot it. The way she moves around medical equipment, her comfort level with trauma. She's been trained. She's just experienced from working here," Dr. Stevens had replied. But even he had noticed Sarah's unusual competence during emergencies. The truth was, Sarah had spent years perfecting the art of being forgettable. She'd learned to blend into the background, to be helpful without drawing questions, to use her skills without revealing their source. It was a carefully constructed identity designed to let her serve without having to explain her past. But there were moments when her training would slip through. Once, when a patient had gone into sudden cardiac arrest in the hallway, Sarah had immediately started chest compressions with textbook precision before the code team arrived. When questioned later, she'd claimed she'd taken a CPR class years ago. Another time, she'd instinctively stabilized a patient's cervical spine after a fall, using a technique that suggested advanced trauma training. Sarah's apartment reflected the same careful anonymity as her work persona. Small, neat, sparsely furnished. There were no photos displayed, no personal memorabilia, nothing that would reveal her history to casual visitors. But hidden in a locked closet were items that told a different story. Military medals in a small wooden box, photographs of her in Army combat medic uniform, letters from soldiers she'd served with, and a purple heart that she'd never told anyone about. The isolation wasn't entirely by choice. Sarah had tried dating a few times since moving to the city, but relationships became complicated when people started asking about her past. How do you explain years of military service in Iraq and Afghanistan to someone who's never left their hometown? How do you describe treating battlefield injuries to someone who thinks a paper cut is traumatic? It was easier to remain alone, to keep her two lives completely separate. At night, Sarah would sometimes dream about the forward operating base where she'd spent 2 tours as a combat medic. She'd wake up with the phantom smell of dust and diesel fuel in her nostrils, the sound of helicopters in her ears. The transition from treating gunshot wounds in a war zone to mopping hospital floors hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. The quiet, predictable routine helped keep the nightmares at bay. What no one at the hospital knew was that Sarah had once been Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, 82nd Airborne Division, one of the most decorated female combat medics of her generation. She'd served 4 tours between 2005 and 2012, earned a Bronze Star for Valor, and had been personally recommended for officer candidate school by her commanding officer. But she'd turned down the promotion and left the Army instead, carrying wounds that weren't visible on her medical records. The decision to become a hospital cleaner hadn't been random. It let her stay connected to medicine without the pressure of life or death decisions. She could help maintain the environment where healing happened, without having to be responsible for the healing itself. It was therapeutic in its own way, and it had worked for 8 years, until the morning when everything changed. That Tuesday morning in March started like any other. Sarah arrived at 5:30 a.m., checked in with the night security guard, and began her rounds. The hospital was in its quiet pre-dawn phase, with only emergency staff and overnight patients awake. She'd finished cleaning the emergency department and was heading toward the surgical wing when she heard raised voices from operating room 3. Dr. Robert Stevens, the hospital's 58-year-old chief surgeon, was preparing for a complex cardiac procedure scheduled for 7 a.m. The patient was a 45-year-old teacher who'd suffered a massive heart attack and needed emergency bypass surgery. Dr. Stevens had arrived early to review the case and coordinate with his surgical team. Sarah was passing through the corridor when she noticed the OR door was open, unusual for pre-surgical preparation. Through the doorway, she could see Dr. Stevens discussing the procedure with his team. Suddenly, his voice changed mid-sentence. I'm not feeling... Dr. Stevens put his hand to his chest, his face going pale. Lead surgical nurse Amanda Williams immediately noticed something was wrong. Dr. Stevens, are you okay? But Dr. Stevens wasn't okay. The chest pain was severe and spreading down his left arm. His breathing became labored, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool temperature of the OR. I think I'm... He couldn't finish the sentence before collapsing to the sterile floor. Code blue in OR 3. Amanda shouted into the intercom, but panic was setting in fast. Dr. Stevens was unconscious, his breathing shallow, his pulse weak and irregular. The surgical team froze for crucial seconds. Amanda dropped to her knees beside Dr. Stevens, trying to remember her basic life support training, but her hands were shaking. Anesthesiologist Dr. Michael Torres was already scrubbed in and couldn't immediately help without contaminating the sterile field. The circulating nurses were calling for backup, but the nearest available cardiologist was Dr. Martinez, no relation to Sarah, who was in the middle of another emergency surgery. Sarah heard the commotion and moved toward the OR. Through the window, she could see the chaos inside. Medical staff panicking around an unconscious colleague, precious seconds ticking away while people tried to remember protocols they'd practiced but never had to use on their own team. Under normal circumstances, housekeeping staff were strictly forbidden from entering operating rooms during any medical situation. But as Sarah watched Dr. Stevens lying motionless on the floor while trained medical professionals hesitated, her military training overrode hospital policy. She pushed through the OR doors with authority that came from somewhere deep in her muscle memory. "Ma'am, you can't be in here," Amanda called out, but Sarah was already moving toward Dr. Stevens with purpose and confidence that transformed her entire demeanor. "How long has he been down?" Sarah asked, dropping to her knees beside the unconscious surgeon. Her voice was calm, controlled, completely different from the quiet tone the staff was used to hearing. Maybe 90 seconds, Amanda stammered, confused by the sudden take-charge attitude from the cleaning lady. Sarah immediately began her assessment with military precision. She checked Dr. Stevens' pulse at the carotid artery. No pulse. She looked at his chest. No visible respirations. She checked his pupils, dilated and unresponsive. Her movements were fast, efficient, and completely professional. "He's in cardiac arrest. Step back," Sarah commanded, positioning herself for CPR. Without waiting for permission, Sarah placed her hands in perfect position on Dr. Stevens' chest, heel of her left hand on the lower half of the breastbone, right hand interlocked on top. She began chest compressions with textbook technique. At least 2 inches deep, at a rate of 100-120 compressions per minute, allowing complete chest recoil between compressions. The surgical team watched in stunned silence as the quiet cleaning lady performed flawless CPR with the confidence of someone who'd done it hundreds of times. After 30 compressions, Sarah tilted Dr. Stevens' head back, lifted his chin to open the airway, and delivered 2 rescue breaths with perfect technique. "Someone get the crash cart," Sarah ordered while continuing compressions. "And call cardiology. Tell them we have a physician down with cardiac arrest." Nurse Amanda snapped out of her shock and ran for the defibrillator. When she returned, Sarah was maintaining perfect CPR rhythm, showing no signs of fatigue despite the physical demands of effective chest compressions. "Charged to 200 joules, Sarah said, taking the defibrillator paddles with practiced ease. She positioned them correctly, 1 paddle below the right collarbone, 1 at the left side of the chest below the armpit. "Everyone clear the patient!" The first shock lifted Dr. Stevens' body, but the monitor still showed no organized heart rhythm. Sarah immediately resumed chest compressions for another 2 minutes before charging the defibrillator again. "Clear!" she called out, delivering the second shock. This time the monitor showed the return of a heartbeat. "We have sinus rhythm," Sarah announced, checking Dr. Stevens' pulse at the carotid artery. "Pulse is weak but present. Someone establish IV access. We need to get him on a monitor and start thinking about why a healthy 58-year-old just went into cardiac arrest." Young Nurse Amy stared in disbelief as Sarah continued to manage the code with the authority of an experienced emergency physician. How do you know how to do all this?" Sarah looked up from where she was assessing Dr. Stevens' neurological responses, her hands steady and sure. "I used to be a medic." Dr. Stevens' color was improving, and his breathing was becoming more regular. Within 3 minutes, the cardiology team arrived and took over his care. As they prepared to transfer him to the cardiac ICU, Sarah quietly stepped back, removed her gloves, and started to return to her housekeeping duties. But the surgical team couldn't stop staring at her. The quiet, unassuming cleaning lady had just performed a flawless cardiac resuscitation with skills that many of them had only seen in textbooks. "Sarah?" Amanda called as she reached the door. "Where did you learn to do that?" Sarah paused, her hand on the door handle. For a moment, her carefully maintained facade cracked slightly, revealing something harder and more experienced underneath. "Army combat medic," she said quietly. 82nd Airborne. 4 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan." And then she was gone, leaving behind a room full of medical professionals who suddenly realized they'd been working alongside a decorated war veteran who'd been hiding in plain sight for 8 years. The transformation in Sarah during those critical minutes had been remarkable. The quiet, deferential cleaning lady had disappeared, replaced by someone who moved with military precision and spoke with unquestionable authority. Her knowledge of emergency medicine hadn't just been academic. It had been earned through years of treating combat casualties under the worst possible conditions. But as quickly as it had appeared, that persona vanished when Sarah picked up her mop and returned to her rounds. To anyone passing in the hallway, she looked like the same unremarkable housekeeping employee she'd always been. Only now a small group of medical professionals knew there was much more to Sarah Martinez than met the eye. Dr. Chen couldn't let it go. After ensuring Dr. Stevens was stable in the cardiac ICU, she went looking for Sarah. She found her in the supply closet, methodically restocking cleaning supplies as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "Sarah," Dr. Chen said softly, "can we talk?" Sarah looked up, and Dr. Chen could see the careful walls going back up in her eyes. "Is Dr. Stevens okay?" "He's stable, thanks to you." "Sarah, you were a combat medic?" Sarah finished arranging bottles of disinfectant before answering. "Yes, a long time ago." "How long ago? And why didn't you ever mention your medical background?" Sarah sat down on an overturned supply crate, suddenly looking tired. "I got out in 2012, 12 years ago, and I didn't mention it because I wasn't applying for a medical position. I was applying to clean floors." Dr. Chen took a seat on another crate. "But why? With your training, you could have been working as a nurse, an EMT, a physician assistant." "Because," Sarah said quietly, "when I came home from my last deployment, I couldn't handle the pressure anymore. Couldn't deal with making life-or-death decisions every day. I needed something quieter. Will you tell me about your service?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "I enlisted when I was 20. My family couldn't afford college, and I wanted to serve my country. They trained me as a combat medic, and I was good at it. Really good." "When were you deployed?" "First tour was Iraq in 2005. Second tour was Iraq again in 2007. Third and fourth tours were Afghanistan 2009 and 2011. Sarah's voice became distant. "I spent most of my time at forward operating bases, treating everything from IED injuries to sniper wounds to disease outbreaks." Dr. Chen waited, sensing there was more. "The worst part wasn't the injuries," Sarah continued. "It was the decisions. When you have 3 critically wounded soldiers and only enough supplies to save 2, you have to choose. When a convoy gets hit, and you've got multiple casualties and limited time before extraction, you have to decide who gets treatment first, and who you might have to let go. That's an impossible burden for anyone to carry." "It was. But we carried it because we had to. Because those soldiers were counting on us." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "I saved a lot of lives over there, but I lost some too. And the ones you lose, they stay with you." "Is that why you left the Army?" Sarah nodded. "My last tour in Afghanistan was supposed to be my final deployment before coming home for good. But on March 15, 2012, our FOB was attacked. Coordinated assault, mortars, small arms fire, suicide bomber at the front gate. We had 17 casualties in the first hour." She paused, lost in the memory. "I worked for 14 hours straight in our aid station, treating wounded soldiers while the firefight was still going on around us. We saved 15 of the 17, but Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Private First Class Thompson, they didn't make it." "I'm sorry." "Rodriguez was 24 years old, had a wife and a baby girl back home. Thompson was 19, just a kid from Ohio who'd enlisted to pay for college. I worked on them for hours, but the injuries were too severe. They died holding my hands while I told them they were going to be okay." Dr. Chen felt tears in her eyes. "That wasn't your fault. Logically, I know that. But emotionally," Sarah shrugged. "When I got home, I couldn't turn it off. Every emergency call, every trauma case, every time someone's life was in my hands, I'd see Rodriguez and Thompson. I'd freeze up, second-guess myself. I couldn't be the medic I used to be. So you became a janitor instead." "So I found a way to still serve, but without the pressure. Working here, keeping this place clean and safe, helping maintain the environment where healing happens. It gave me purpose without the trauma triggers." Dr. Chen was amazed. "But what you did today with Dr. Stevens, that was flawless emergency medicine." "Muscle memory," Sarah said simply. "Training that deep doesn't just disappear. When I saw him collapse, everything else fell away, and the medic in me took over. I didn't even think about it. Do you miss it, being a medic?" Sarah considered the question. "I miss helping people directly. I miss the teamwork, the sense of purpose, the feeling that what I was doing really mattered. But I don't miss the pressure, the life-or-death decisions, the weight of carrying someone else's survival in my hands." "What about your family? Do they know about your service?" Sarah's expression darkened. My parents died in a car accident while I was on my second deployment. My brother, we don't really talk anymore. He never understood why I enlisted, never understood why I kept re-upping for more tours. When I came back changed, he said I wasn't the sister he remembered. Are you married, kids? No. Hard to maintain relationships when you're deployed most of the time. And after I got back, dating was complicated. How do you explain PTSD to someone who's never experienced trauma? How do you tell someone that crowded restaurants make you nervous because you're always looking for exits, or that fireworks give you flashbacks? Dr. Chen nodded understandingly. So you kept your military background secret? It was easier. People hear combat veteran and they either want to thank you for your service, which makes me uncomfortable, or they want to hear war stories, which I don't want to tell. Or they assume you're damaged goods, too broken to be normal. I just wanted to be normal. But you were helping people all along, weren't you? Sarah smiled slightly. In my own way. I've prevented dozens of accidents over the years by keeping floors dry and hallways clear. I've caught medication errors by noticing discrepancies while cleaning. I've spotted signs of patient distress that others missed and quietly alerted nurses. I've been the extra pair of hands during emergencies, the person who makes sure equipment is ready and pathways are clear. Hidden in plain sight. Exactly. I could serve without having to explain myself, help without having to relive my past every day. Dr. Chen shook her head in amazement. We've been working alongside a hero all this time. I'm not a hero, Sarah said firmly. Heroes are the ones who didn't make it home. Heroes are Rodriguez and Thompson and all the others whose names are on that black wall in Washington. I'm just someone who did her job and was lucky enough to survive. But you've been serving this whole time, even after you came home. Service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It just takes different forms. Sarah stood up, returning to her supplies. But now that you know what happens, am I going to be able to keep working here quietly? Or is everything going to change? Dr. Chen considered the question. After what happened today, I don't think anonymity is an option anymore. People are going to have questions. Sarah sighed. I figured as much. Maybe it's time to stop hiding anyway. Maybe I've been quiet long enough. Would you consider using your medical training more directly? We could really use someone with your experience on our emergency response team. I don't know, Sarah said honestly. The thought of being responsible for people's lives again, it scares me. But maybe it's time to find out if I can handle it. We could start small. Trauma response training for staff, consultation on difficult cases, assistance during mass casualty events. Sarah nodded slowly. I'd like to think about it. It's been a long time since I've had to make those kinds of decisions. The fact that you saved Dr. Stevens today suggests that maybe you're ready. Maybe I am. Word of what happened in OR3 spread through the hospital faster than Sarah had anticipated. By the end of her shift, everyone from the cafeteria workers to the hospital administration had heard that the quiet cleaning lady was actually a decorated Army combat medic who'd saved Dr. Stevens' life. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Doctors who had barely acknowledged her existence now stopped to thank her. Nurses sought her out to share their own military connections. Even patients and their families, somehow having heard the story, looked at her with new respect and gratitude. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the hospital director, called Sarah into her office the next morning. Sarah entered nervously, half expecting to be disciplined for violating protocol by entering the operating room. Sarah, please sit down, Dr. Warren said warmly. First, I want to thank you on behalf of the entire hospital. Dr. Stevens is recovering well because of your quick action. I just did what needed to be done, Sarah replied, which is exactly what we'd expect from someone with your background. I've been reviewing your personnel file and I have to ask, why didn't you mention your military medical training when you applied here 8 years ago? Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Because I wasn't applying for a medical position. I needed work that would help me heal, not work that would constantly remind me of things I was trying to process. Dr. Warren nodded understandingly. I've spoken with several veterans on our staff, and they've helped me understand that the transition to civilian life can be incredibly complex. But Sarah, you have skills and experience that could benefit our entire hospital. Would you consider working more directly with our medical team? I've been away from clinical medicine for 12 years. My certifications are long expired and protocols have changed. We can arrange for updated training and certification. What matters most is your foundation of experience treating trauma in high-stress situations. That's something that can't be taught in a classroom. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Could I continue some of my housekeeping duties as well? I know it might sound strange, but that work has been therapeutic for me. Of course, we could create a hybrid position, facilities management during quiet periods, emergency medical support when needed. You'd be our secret weapon. For the first time in years, Sarah felt a spark of the excitement she'd once felt about medicine. I'd like to try that. The change in how people treated Sarah was profound and immediate. Doctors who had overlooked her for years now sought her input on difficult cases. Nurses asked her opinion on trauma protocols. Medical students, hearing about her background, approached her with questions about battlefield medicine. Dr. Chen invited Sarah to join the weekly emergency department case review meetings. We could really benefit from your perspective on our trauma cases, she explained. Sarah was hesitant at first, but she found that she enjoyed the intellectual challenge of discussing complex medical scenarios. Her experience treating injuries in resource-limited environments provided insights that enhanced the team's approach to emergency medicine. In Afghanistan, we had to improvise constantly, Sarah explained during one case review. Limited supplies, no backup, hostile environment. You learn to make critical decisions quickly and to use whatever resources you have creatively. Those skills translate well to civilian emergency medicine. Nurse Lisa Rodriguez approached Sarah during a break. My nephew Jake is shipping out to Afghanistan next month. Army medic just like you were. Would you be willing to talk with him? Give him some advice? Sarah hesitated. She'd avoided talking about her military service for so long that the idea of mentoring a young soldier felt overwhelming. But then she thought about all the new medics she'd worked with overseas, how desperately they'd needed guidance from experienced personnel. I'd be honored to talk with him. The conversation with specialist Jake Rodriguez took place the following weekend at a coffee shop near the hospital. Jake was 22 years old, fresh out of advanced medical training, eager but nervous about his upcoming deployment. Sergeant Martinez, he said formally, standing when Sarah approached. Just Sarah is fine, she said, gesturing for him to sit. And you don't need to be so formal with me. Ma'am, Aunt Lisa says you served 4 tours as a combat medic. Could you tell me what it's really like over there? Sarah studied the young man's enthusiastic face and saw herself 15 years earlier. It's nothing like training, Jake. Nothing like what you see in movies or read in books. It's hot and dusty and terrifying, and you'll be responsible for lives in ways that no 22-year-old should have to be. Jake's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. Are you trying to scare me? No, I'm trying to prepare you. Because if you go over there expecting glory or thinking it'll be like your training scenarios, you'll be unprepared for the reality. But if you go expecting to serve your fellow soldiers and do the best job you can with the training you've received, you'll be okay. What's the most important thing I should know? Sarah thought for a moment. Trust your training, but adapt to circumstances. Learn from every experienced medic you meet. And remember that your job isn't just medical. You're also a source of calm and confidence for wounded soldiers. Sometimes the most important treatment you can provide is just being steady and competent when everything around you is chaos. Did you ever lose someone you thought you could save? Sarah's expression grew serious. Yes, many times. That's the hardest part of the job, and it never gets easier. You'll blame yourself for things that weren't your fault, and you'll carry those faces with you forever. But you'll also save people who wouldn't have made it without you, and their families will go home intact because of your skills. How do you live with the ones you couldn't save? By honoring them through continuing to serve, by remembering that every life has value and every effort to preserve life matters, even when it doesn't succeed. And by understanding that saving lives isn't just about medicine, it's about giving people hope and dignity in their worst moments. Jake was quiet for a moment. Aunt Lisa says you work as a janitor now. After everything you accomplished in the Army, why? Because healing takes many forms, Sarah explained. For 8 years I healed by serving in a different way, by maintaining the environment where other healers could do their work. But maybe now it's time for me to step back into medicine. Would you mind if I stayed in touch while I'm deployed, maybe asked for advice? Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of passing on hard-won knowledge to the next generation. I'd like that very much. And Jake, take care of yourself over there. Your family needs you to come home safe. As Jake left, Sarah realized that for the first time since leaving the Army, she felt like she had something valuable to offer beyond keeping floors clean. Her experiences, her training, her survival, they weren't just sources of pain anymore. They were gifts she could share. That evening, Sarah made a decision that had been building for weeks. She called her brother Michael for the first time in 2 years. "Sarah, is everything okay?" His voice was cautious but concerned. "I'm okay, Mike. Better than okay, actually. I wanted to tell you something important that happened at work, and maybe explain some things about the last few years." "I'd like that," he said softly. "I've missed talking to you." Sarah spent the next hour telling him about saving Dr. Stevens, about her decision to start using her medical training again, about the process of slowly healing from her military experiences. For the first time, she tried to explain what combat had been like, why she'd been so changed when she came home. "I had no idea," Michael said when she finished. "I mean, I knew you were a medic, but I never understood what that meant in a war zone. I'm sorry I wasn't more patient with you when you came back. You couldn't have known. I never told you. I was so focused on trying to be normal again that I never explained why normal was so hard for me. Are you really doing better now?" "I think so. For the first time in years, I feel like I might be ready to be a medic again. Different than before, but still serving." "I'm proud of you, Sarah. I always have been, even when I didn't understand." That conversation marked another turning point in Sarah's healing journey. She was beginning to integrate her military experience with her civilian life instead of keeping them completely separate. 2 weeks later, Sarah received a call that would test her newfound confidence in ways she hadn't expected. Dr. Warren contacted her at home on a Saturday evening with an unusual request. "Sarah, I apologize for calling you at home, but we have a situation. There's been a major accident on I-95, a multi-vehicle pileup involving 2 buses and several cars. We're expecting at least 20 casualties, and our emergency department is about to be overwhelmed. Could you come in and help with triage?" Sarah felt her heart rate spike at the mention of mass casualties, but underneath the anxiety was something else, a sense of readiness. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The scene at the hospital was controlled chaos when Sarah arrived. Ambulances were lined up outside the emergency department. EMTs were wheeling in patients of varying severity, and the medical staff was working to establish triage areas and treatment priorities. Dr. Chen spotted Sarah immediately. "Thank God you're here. We need someone with mass casualty experience to help organize this." For a moment, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the familiar sights and sounds. Multiple injured people, urgent radio chatter, the organized frenzy of medical personnel trying to save lives under pressure. But then her training kicked in, and she moved into the familiar role of combat medic with surprising ease. "We need to establish proper triage categories," Sarah said, taking charge with natural authority. "Red tags for immediate life-threatening injuries requiring surgery. Yellow for urgent but stable. Green for minor injuries that can wait. Black for expectant care." She began moving through the incoming patients with practiced efficiency, making rapid assessments based on mechanism of injury, vital signs, and level of consciousness. Her military experience with limited resources and overwhelming casualties translated perfectly to the civilian emergency setting. "Red tag, penetrating abdominal trauma with signs of internal bleeding," Sarah called out, directing paramedics toward Trauma Bay 1. "Yellow tag, multiple fractures but stable vitals, needs X-rays but not immediate surgery. Green tag, lacerations and contusions, can wait for treatment." For the next 6 hours, Sarah worked alongside the medical team as an equal partner. She started IVs with the confidence that came from doing them under fire. She assisted with emergency procedures, managed airways, and provided the kind of steady, competent care that only comes from years of experience in high-pressure situations. "Where did you learn to start an IV like that?" asked Dr. Martinez, a young resident who'd been struggling with a difficult insertion on a combative patient. "When you're working in a medical tent in Afghanistan with mortar rounds landing nearby and your patient is delirious from blood loss, you learn to get it right the first time," Sarah replied, successfully establishing the IV line in one smooth motion. During a brief lull, Dr. Chen approached Sarah. "You're incredible at this. It's like watching someone who was born to do emergency medicine." "It feels good," Sarah admitted. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Would you consider making this permanent? I mean, working more regularly with our emergency team?" "I think I would. I think I'm finally ready." When the crisis was over and all 23 patients had been treated and either admitted or discharged, the exhausted medical team gathered in the break room. Dr. Warren appeared with pizza and coffee, her way of thanking everyone for their exceptional work. I want to particularly acknowledge Sarah Martinez, Dr. Warren announced. Her leadership during this mass casualty event undoubtedly saved lives. She's agreed to join our emergency response team permanently, while maintaining her current facilities management responsibilities. The applause that followed was genuine and heartfelt. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving the military. The satisfaction of being part of a team, of using her skills to their fullest potential, of making a real difference. That night, Sarah called her brother again to share the news. "I'm so proud of you," Michael said. "It sounds like you're finally finding your way back to who you were meant to be." "Not who I was," Sarah corrected. "Who I'm becoming. I'm not the same person who enlisted at 20 or even the same person who came home at 30. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we're supposed to evolve." "Are you happy, Sarah? Really happy?" Sarah considered the question. "I'm getting there. For the first time in years, I feel like I have a future instead of just a past." 3 weeks later, Sarah's life took another unexpected turn. While reviewing trauma protocols with the emergency team, Dr. Chen mentioned a patient case that made Sarah's heart stop. "We had an interesting case last week," Dr. Chen said. "Young woman, 28 years old, came in after a motorcycle accident. What made it interesting was her medical alert bracelet. She's a former Army nurse, served in Afghanistan. She was asking specifically for a female veteran to talk to about some anxiety she was having about the medical procedures." "What was her name?" Sarah asked, though she already suspected she knew. "Jennifer Thompson. She said she'd been trying to locate a combat medic she'd worked with overseas, someone who'd made a big impression on her. Said this medic had saved her life during a rocket attack in 2011. Sarah felt her breath catch. "Jen Thompson? Tall, blonde, from Texas? You know her?" "She was a nurse at FOB Chapman during my last deployment. We worked together for 6 months. Sarah's mind raced back to that rocket attack. Jennifer had been caught in the open when the sirens went off, and Sarah had tackled her into a bunker just as shrapnel tore through the area where she'd been standing. She's been looking for you. Left her contact information in case we ever encountered a female combat medic named Sarah Martinez." That evening, Sarah called the number Dr. Chen had given her. When Jennifer answered, her voice immediately filled with emotion. "Sarah? Sarah Martinez? Oh my God, I can't believe it's really you!" "Hey Jen, I heard you were looking for me. I've been trying to find you for 3 years. I wanted to thank you for saving my life, but also, I wanted to ask you something. How did you transition back to civilian life? Because I'm struggling, and I thought maybe someone who'd been through it could help." They met for coffee the next day, and Sarah was amazed to see how much Jennifer had changed. The confident, capable nurse she'd known in Afghanistan seemed smaller, more fragile, clearly dealing with her own demons from their shared deployment. "I've been having panic attacks," Jennifer admitted, "especially in medical settings. The sounds, the urgency, the pressure, it all takes me right back to that aid station. I've been working as a school nurse because I can't handle hospital medicine anymore." "I understand," Sarah said. "I spent 8 years working as a janitor because I couldn't handle the pressure of making medical decisions again." "But you're working as a medic again now?" "Just recently. It took a long time to be ready, and I'm still figuring it out day by day." They talked for 3 hours, sharing experiences and coping strategies. Sarah found that helping Jennifer process her transition challenges was therapeutic for her own healing. It reminded her that survival wasn't just about making it home alive. It was about finding ways to live meaningfully after trauma. "Would you be interested in starting a support group?" Jennifer asked. "For female veterans transitioning back to healthcare? I know there are others out there struggling with similar issues." "I'd like that," Sarah said. "I think I'm finally ready to stop hiding from my past and start using it to help others." 6 months later, Sarah's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. She'd completed her emergency medical technician recertification and was working part-time in the hospital's emergency department while maintaining some of her facilities management duties. Her official title was Emergency Response Coordinator, but everyone simply called her Sarah. The support group she'd started with Jennifer had grown to include 12 female veterans from various medical specialties. They met twice monthly at the hospital, sharing experiences and strategies for integrating their military medical training with civilian healthcare careers. Word was spreading, and they'd received requests from veterans in other cities who wanted to start similar groups. "You've created something really special here," Dr. Warren told Sarah during their quarterly review meeting. "Not just your clinical contributions, but the way you've helped our entire staff understand and support our veteran employees. Sarah had also begun teaching monthly training sessions for hospital staff, sharing lessons from military medicine that couldn't be found in textbooks. Her classes on trauma response, mass casualty triage, and working under extreme pressure were always oversubscribed. The most important thing I can teach you, she would tell new residents and nurses, is that staying calm saves lives. Your patients will take their emotional cues from you. If you're composed and confident, they'll trust that they're in capable hands. Jake Rodriguez had been writing to her regularly from Afghanistan, and Sarah found immense satisfaction in mentoring him through his deployment. His letters reminded her of her own early days as a medic, but also showed her how much she'd grown since then. "You were right about everything," he wrote in one letter. "The training prepared me for the medical procedures, but nothing could have prepared me for the emotional weight of holding someone's life in your hands. Yesterday I treated a local kid who'd stepped on an IED. Couldn't have been more than 12 years old. I kept thinking about what you said about being a source of calm and hope. I think it helped him as much as the medicine did." Sarah's relationship with her brother Michael had continued to strengthen. He'd visited twice now, and was amazed by the transformation he saw in his sister. "You seem like yourself again," he told her during his last visit. "Not the person you were before you enlisted, but the person you were supposed to become. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Sarah replied. "I'm not trying to go back to who I was. I'm trying to integrate all my experiences into who I am now." One evening in late autumn, Sarah was finishing her shift when she encountered a young woman crying in the hospital parking lot. The woman was about 25, wearing scrubs, clearly a new nurse or medical student. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked gently. "I don't think I can do this," the woman said through tears. "I had my first really bad trauma case today. A little girl who was hit by a car. I froze up. I couldn't function. Maybe I'm not cut out for emergency medicine." Sarah sat down on a nearby bench, gesturing for the woman to join her. "What's your name?" "Ashley. I'm a first-year nursing student doing my emergency rotation." "Ashley, I'm Sarah. I work here too." She smiled encouragingly. "Want to hear about my first bad trauma case?" "You had one too?" "I was 22 years old, deployed to Iraq, and they brought in a soldier who'd been hit by an IED. Multiple traumatic amputations, massive blood loss. I completely panicked. Forgot everything I'd been trained to do. Another medic had to take over while I sat in the corner trying not to throw up." Ashley looked surprised. "But you work in emergency medicine now." "Yes, but it took time. And practice. And learning that feeling scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. The key is learning to function despite the fear, not waiting for the fear to go away." They talked for almost an hour, Sarah sharing her own struggles with medical trauma, her years away from medicine, and her recent return to emergency care. Ashley left looking more hopeful, with Sarah's contact information and an invitation to call if she needed someone to talk to who understood. As Sarah drove home, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that morning when Dr. Stevens collapsed. She'd gone from hiding her military past to embracing it, from avoiding medical responsibility to seeking it, from isolation to mentorship and community. Her apartment had changed too. The walls now displayed her military commendations alongside photos from the veteran support group. She'd framed a letter from Jake's commanding officer praising her mentorship of young medics. On her bookshelf sat medical journals she was actually reading again, not just collecting. The nightmares hadn't completely disappeared, but they were less frequent now. And when they came, she had coping strategies that worked. People she could talk to who understood, and a sense of purpose that helped her process the trauma constructively. Sarah had also started dating again. Dr. Kevin Walsh, a trauma surgeon who'd joined the hospital 6 months earlier, had asked her out after they'd worked together on a particularly difficult case. He was a former Navy corpsman who understood military culture, which made communication easier. "I like that you don't need me to be anything other than who I am," she'd told him on their third date. "You don't want me to hide my military experience or pretend it didn't happen." "Why would I want you to hide the experiences that made you who you are?" he'd replied. "Your service is part of what makes you an incredible medic and an amazing person." 1 year after the incident with Dr. Stevens, the hospital held a special recognition ceremony. Sarah had been selected to receive the hospital's annual Excellence in Patient Care Award, not just for her clinical skills, but for her contributions to staff development and veteran support. Standing at the podium, Looking out at the assembled staff, many of whom had become genuine friends, Sarah felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since leaving the military. "When I started working here 9 years ago," she began, "I was running from my past. I thought that if I could just be invisible enough, the memories would fade and the pain would stop. What I learned is that healing doesn't come from hiding our experiences. It comes from finding new ways to use them in service of others." She paused, seeing familiar faces in the audience. Dr. Chen, who'd become a close friend. Jennifer Thompson, who was now working as a trauma nurse at a nearby hospital. Jake Rodriguez, who was home on leave from his deployment. To my fellow veterans in the audience, and to anyone who's struggling to find their place after difficult experiences, your skills matter, your perspective is valuable, and there's always a way to keep serving, even when the path isn't clear. Sometimes we have to be patient with ourselves while we figure out how our past experiences can contribute to our future purpose. The standing ovation that followed was deeply moving, but what meant the most to Sarah was the line of people who approached her afterward. Young veterans looking for guidance, medical students wanting mentorship, colleagues thanking her for changing their understanding of what it means to serve. Later that evening, at a small celebration dinner with her brother Jennifer and Kevin, Sarah made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I've been accepted to the University of Maryland's Physician Assistant Program," she said. "I start next fall." "Sarah, that's incredible," Michael exclaimed. "Are you nervous about going back to school?" "Terrified," Sarah admitted with a laugh, "but also excited. I've realized that I want to do more than emergency response. I want to help design programs for veteran healthcare, maybe work with combat trauma research, definitely continue the support groups and mentorship programs." "What made you decide to go back to school?" Jennifer asked. "I realized that my military experience isn't something I need to overcome or work around. It's my greatest asset. The things I learned treating battlefield injuries, working under extreme pressure, making critical decisions with limited resources, those are skills that can help people in ways I'm just beginning to understand." "I'm proud of you," Kevin said, reaching for her hand. "You're not just moving forward, you're building something meaningful from everything you've been through." As the evening wound down, and Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point, she thought about the young woman who'd enlisted in the Army 18 years earlier, desperate to serve her country and pay for college. That woman could never have imagined the path that lay ahead. The combat deployments, the lives saved and lost, the years of hiding and healing, and finally, the integration of all those experiences into a purpose bigger than herself. Sarah's story reminds us that heroes don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they push cleaning carts through hospital corridors, blend into the background, and serve in ways that go unnoticed for years. But when the moment comes when lives hang in the balance, they step forward with skills forged in the crucible of service and sacrifice. From the battlefield of Afghanistan to the hallways of a civilian hospital, from combat medic to janitor to emergency coordinator to future physician assistant, Sarah's journey shows us that healing is possible, that service takes many forms, and that our most difficult experiences can become our greatest strengths when we find the courage to embrace them. In Maryland, Sarah would go on to specialize in emergency medicine and trauma care, developing innovative treatment protocols based on lessons learned from military medicine. She would help establish veteran transition programs at medical schools across the country, ensuring that other former military medics wouldn't have to choose between using their skills and protecting their emotional well-being. And every year on March 15th, the anniversary of the attack that ended her military career, Sarah would visit the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. She would find the names of Rodriguez and Thompson, the soldiers she couldn't save, and tell them about the lives she'd been able to save since coming home. Because some forms of service never end, and some promises to fallen comrades are kept not through guilt, but through living fully and purposefully in their honor. The cleaning cart had been retired, but the mission continued. Because once a medic, always a medic, and the best way to honor those who didn't make it home is to never stop serving those who did. Have you ever met someone like Sarah? Someone who seemed ordinary but carried extraordinary experiences? Do you know a veteran whose story deserves recognition? Share their story in the comments and let us know which city you're watching from. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe to Silent Heroes Stories and help ensure that no hero remains invisible.